So in the last episode we got the outline of the body cut onto this top, and then I marked out and roughly cut the F-holes. Now I've been spending a little bit of time going around these, cleaning them up, mainly using kind of carving files, and then when I'm closer just going in with a normal file. I'm very close. I've just got this second one to finish off, so I'll crack on with that, and then we can have a conversation about what the next steps are on this, because once again I'm kind of faced with order of operations conundrums. But more about that once we got these holes cleaned up. And as I said, it's just literally a case of very gently and carefully just taking this back to the line that we cut in, which you can just about see there. You see that loose material. So that's the remainder of the waste. So we just need to kind of gently take the file and clean that off. And then once I get close, I'll just take a normal file, much finer. And just use that to clean up the final last little bits. So I'm going to continue working my way around this, get the rest of it cleaned up. The worst of it is going to be in these rounded areas. They are a little bit more tricky, and then I'll join you back when it's all sorted out. Okay, so I'm nearly all of the way around this second one now. I've just got a little bit to do on this round bit on the end and just a touch of cleaning up on these two top faces. But we're virtually there and kind of ready to move on to the next step. And that is where we kind of meet some difficulties, because there are implications regardless of which way I choose to go next. As I've said in the past, this top is a little bit too thick. Currently, we're kind of about 8.8 mil, 3 mil thicker than I would like it. What I'm probably aiming to do is take this down to kind of 6.5-ish mil, which will leave me a little bit of wriggle room for sanding, etc. And what I said I was going to do was I was going to actually glue this onto the body blank, which I know is straight, which will kind of take out the tiny bit of deflection that there is in the top. So we know we've got it glued down to a straight base, and then I can skim the top off to get it down to the thickness that we need. And in theory, there's not an issue there. Where it gets complicated is with these F-holes, because as I've said, I want to bind these, and I think my best chance of success with getting the binding on is before I glue the top on. Which means, as well as thinning the body down, I'm also going to have to, at some stage, to some degree, thin down that binding as well, which could be an issue. I'm not entirely sure how well the binding would respond to being planed, especially when you think about how delicate it's likely to be around some of these sharp edges and on the joints in the middle. So there's issues whichever way I choose to go. Now initially I said I was going to thin this down with a hand plane, and I'm pretty confident I could do that with a reasonable amount of success if this was just the wood and not the binding. So I'm not going to do it that way. I've changed my mind about that, and what I am in fact going to use is the mother of all router bits. I'm going to set up my router sled, get this into the big router, and just use this to mill off that couple of millimeters that we need to. It's a pretty new cutter. It is still nice and sharp, nice and clean faces on there, and I think that will give me the best chance of getting the wood and the binding thin down at the same time. Which means the next bit we've got to get sorted out is obviously a final little bit of a clean up on the F-holes, and then I've got quite a bit of spare binding that was left over from a previous build, which will be great for the F-holes. And then I've got a couple of packs of additional binding for around the top of the body and potentially on the neck and fretboard as well. So we can make a start on getting this prepared. Now, I have done a bit of research on this, and what I've discovered is the key to this is going to be preparation. Some of these bits that are going around the kind of main part, they're pretty straight, so they're going to go down fairly easily. But some of these more complicated bits are going to need a lot of preforming, and I want to do this with as few joins in it as humanly possible. So I'm thinking 4 bits for each F-hole maximum. Okay, so I've pressed on with the cleaning up of these F-holes, and they're looking really nice now. Very happy with them. So next up, I need to bite the bullet and make a start on this binding. Now, there's a few things to bear in mind here. We've already established that this top is about 8 or 9 mil thick, which is actually about 3 mil thicker than my binding. So whichever way I do it, there's not enough binding to actually cover the whole of that. But I don't mind that, because obviously we need to thin this down. So what I'm going to do is just align the binding kind of fairly closely with the bottom face of the top, which in theory will leave me just the material that we need to clean off, standing proud of it. So what that means is once this is glued on and we're ready to thin it down, I can actually just go down to where the binding is starting to become flush, and I know I've gone far enough. This is obviously a complex shape, and whilst this is flexible, it's not so flexible that I'm going to be able to get it to go around all of these curves in this state. So a little bit of preforming is going to be central to my success in this job, and to that end I've got the heat gun on hand. Most of these are fine. It's just these really curly bits around the end that I'll need to preform. Next up, I've been using acetone to stick my binding on for quite a while now, and I've had really good results. What I'm thinking for these though is, on these really tight bits, I need something that's going to stick, and is going to stick quite quickly. So I'm thinking, at least for these curly bits, we can use super glue. So I can get it on, I can hold it firmly in position, try not to stick myself to the job, and within a few seconds that will be bonded to a point where it's not going to come off. I might use acetone for the rest of it, I don't know, I'll see. And I've also got a little pot of binding goop mixed up. So this is just binding dissolved in acetone, and that gives me a kind of a filler that is exactly the same kind of material as the binding itself. So hopefully if we need to do any filling, we'll have a filler that matches and won't be visible. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking and start get some of these little pieces of binding prepared and ready to go. I can see no compelling reason not to start with the difficult bits. Okay, so that's all cut now, so I'm just going to start working my way around this first one, and like I say, I'm going to kind of start sticking this in with a bit of super glue. One of my dislikes of using super glue for binding is that it takes quite a lot of cleaning up. But I think obviously in this instance that's not going to be quite so much of an issue, because we're going to be planing off a good 2.5–3 millimeters of the top, which will also remove any kind of additional super glue that we don't want knocking around. I'm just going to very gently get some glue in there. And so far that's gone in really nicely. So I'm just going to I'll just carry on dropping a bit of glue in there. And I think from there on in I am going to revert to my old practice of using a bit of acetone, because it's just a little bit cleaner. And this method is fairly straightforward. I'm simply going to tape this in position. And then I've got, it's just literally a syringe with a bit of acetone in. I'll drop that into there. Just tape it up nice and tight. And then what I'll do is I will leave that for 10 minutes or so to set up. We can take the first bit of tape off, and we just need to make sure that we're then getting the end of it properly seated. Again, just dropping a bit of acetone in there should do that. Then hopefully we can move on to the next bit. Okay, so I've left this for about 15 minutes. Also went and did some other stuff. So we'll just get the tape off and see how we've done. And I think we're looking good. That looks to have gone down very nicely. There is just that little bit at the end there, so again, probably just going to double my tape up for this one. Just to get a bit of clamping pressure. Get that in place ready. Just drop a little bit of acetone in. That looks to have gone down really nicely again. So I'm going to get my next little bit of binding ready, which is going to go in just there like that. And I think to do this, I'm going to have to just remove a little bit of that first bit, because it's holding the next bit off and creating a little bit of a gap. So I need a tiny little saw blade to do that. It's not that tiny, but it's pointy. seems to have done the trick. Almost, it just needs a little bit of a fettle, and what I'm trying to do here is just bring everything down to follow the same line as the wood. And that should go together very nicely. Now what I intend to do here is I'm going to stick it on with the acetone all the way up to here, and then I'm going to put a little dollop of my goop in there to hopefully just fill any gap that there might be once we get there. We're looking good. We're looking good. So I'm just going to take that on so it's in position, and then we can do the acetone trick at this end. And I think this is very much going to be a case of do a little bit, leave it for 10 minutes, let it all dry, move on to the next bit. So this is going to be a little bit stoppy and starty, but hopefully we'll get a nice result out of it. Okay, so we'll get that off there. And that bit is stuck on beautifully. I'm expecting this end of this bit is on nicely, but I'm not expecting much of the other end to have stuck at all. But you never know. It's actually gone on all right. The only bit that we need to address is just in where it's joining on, and I'll try and get a kind of super tight angle on that so we can see what we're doing, because it's time to break out the goop. I'll just get some tape prepared, and I'm just going to get a little bit of this on my cocktail stick. Just force that into that little gap. I'll use a couple of bits of tape. Leave that to dry up, and while that is drying we can crack on with the next little bit. Okay, so just get this bit of tape off, and that's pretty much this first side done. I've made a start on the other side, but I've just got kind of most of the first bit on. But this is taking an absolute age, so I'm probably going to leave this episode here. I'll finish these off camera, and we kind of already know what I'm going to be doing. And I'll join you back next week, but not before I give you a sneaky peek of what this is going to look like once we've done a little bit of cleaning up work on it, when we can start to think about getting this top fitted up and glued onto the back of the body. So until then, don't forget to hit that like button if you've enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I shall see you then. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.